Hi, everybody. Welcome to the very first session of Presenting Our Presence, a brand new experience at the University of Alberta, an opportunity for Indigenous peoples to meet one another. My name is Florence Glanfield. I am a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I was born in Lac La Biche, raised in the Lac La Biche, Fort McMurray region of the province. And I'm a professor of mathematics education and Vice-Provost, Indigenous Programming and Research. It is so amazing to be gathered here today and to be in relationship with Cindy as we imagine this space together. Cindy, it's your turn. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Florence. And yes, again, Tanchi, bonjour, welcome everyone. It's so exciting that we're presenting our first vodcast of presenting our presence. And I want to acknowledge that, this seed kind of was planted months and months ago, maybe even a year ago, with our leadership of Dr. Florence Glanfield and her position, and how that process of coming together in a new way really made us visible to one another. And so I want to kind of acknowledge that inspiration that kind of was inspired in those gatherings as Indigenous scholars and students and administrators all coming together as human beings and coming together to share who we are. And so my name is Dr. Janice Cindy Gaudet. I go by Cindy. I'm a professor at Campus Saint-Jean, assistant professor and a Canada Research Chair in Métis Relations and Land-based Wellness. I am born in Saskatchewan. I come from a strong lineage of 5 generations of Métis women and families in that area. My research is focused around that area and Métis women's stories and Métis women's sovereignty and Métis women's wellness. And certainly that continues and that inspires my work and my teaching at the University of Alberta, and also in how I come to do my work, or the ethics and who I am that I carry with me in everything that I do. I'm an auntie, I'm a sister, I have little ones who call me Kokom, and I'm a daughter, and I feel pretty grateful to be part of this initiatives and co-creating it with all of those our Indigenous friends and colleagues and relatives who will be part of this work also. So POP, what is POP? So POP stands for Presenting Our Presence. It's we're imagining it and co-creating it together as a collective, and it's monthly. What we're hoping for is a monthly vodcast, which is intended to really amplify the voices and the visibility and the presence of Indigenous knowledge holders and learners and change makers who enliven the University of Alberta community. And so this really fits well with Dr. Florence Glanfield's new position as, not new, I guess, it's, the position of that space and that office also of Indigenous and Programming and Research Office mandate to create a welcoming and a safe environment for Indigenous peoples at the University of Alberta. And we want to do that with our Indigenous-led protocols, making sure that those who wish to be part, just who wish to kind of enter into this space and share their gifts and their contributions and give a voice to it, that are stewards of their own stories. And there's been this really incredible support from various different parties at the University of Alberta through the marketing, alumni relations, through communications branch. So there's just been incredible support, because I think that, we all recognize now, or increasingly recognize Indigenous peoples at the University of Alberta and the ways in which we contribute that is way beyond just EDI or reconciliation or kind of these frameworks that have been provided for us, but that We've always been here. Our relatives have always been here. There's many who carve these pathways for us to be here, and for us to be here as an Indigenous person, that we don't need to leave those parts of ourselves outside the doorway anymore, or leave them at the door. And so I think that's really, and as Florence, we were speaking and talking, it's like creating that sense of belonging, and that sense of value and contribution. And as you often speak about, it's like, yeah, we all have a gift that we carry, and we all will pick up that gift from each other, and supporting each other in who we are, and that becoming, and where we're going. And so we started by presenting it to the Indigenous Advisory Council. We dreamed about what is that image, that creative image that will be part of our visual, the idea of beading, and that as representing the coming together, and that each bead is like a gift. Each bead is that prayer, and that linking together. So we've invited Dr. Trudy Cardinal to be part of that imaging of the symbolism and the virtual imaging, and really honoring and highlighting that way of also creating knowledge, as in terms of that beadwork and what that represents. And so they'll be filming of her beadwork in action, and how that will be displayed, we'll leave it to our creative team behind the scenes that will surely enliven that space and our podcast. And also, and then inviting Trudy to be really our first, I'm not sure of our first guest, to share with us how the meaning behind beading in her life, how it served her, what it means for her, and really honoring and privileging that as value within the academy, and that as a creative, like, again, I cannot emphasize enough the many ways that we can produce knowledge. And I think that's one of the things that we really offer as Indigenous people at the university. And regardless if we are a student, in administration, professors, in all these capacities in which we take up this space.
Thank you, Cindy. So, and on the Indigenous Advisory Council, of course, we have individuals who are Indigenous and who work in all kinds of roles at the University of Alberta. Now, we don't have students represented on that council. So I wonder, we could imagine students participating as well, right? As we come to develop an understanding of what presenting our presence is going to look like. We hope to release an episode of Presenting Our Presence for each of the moon months. So that means there won't be 12 in one year, but there'll be 13 moons. And we look forward to having people join us for Presenting Our Presence. We expect our first one, besides this one, to be with Dr. Trudy Cardinal. But then we've had volunteers from our Indigenous Advisory Council who are willing to try this out and learn with us as we do it. And so we hope this first episode will be around June 21st. It's a celebration of Indigenous Peoples History Month, and it's a celebration of the National Day for Indigenous Peoples. But then we hope that we will be able to demonstrate the ways in which Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, are part of the vibrant community at the University of Alberta, and continue to be part of the important conversations across the institution.
connections, and kind of recognizing, I think, in so many ways that this is what we bring to our work and bring to who we are. And so it'll be interesting when we have other guests of presenting our presence and inviting them to share what they're bringing, how they see themselves enlivening the Academy, because certainly it's been a really transformative year for me with you, Florence, because you created that space. And I think it's important to speak to that leadership role, but that way of leading in a way that's about a collective, that's about all our shared responsibilities, and about what happens when we become present or visible to one another, and how then we connect those pieces that maybe sometimes the Academy, we feel like we need parts of ourselves at home. You know, the Academy, I think, hasn't always been the friendliest place for Indigenous people. And so part of this work is also sharing who we are with students, right? And sharing who we are with the Academy. And so even for me, working in community, it's like they're always with me in that work. Like your father's with you in your mathematics and that knowledge. And I think it's so beautiful because it gets out of this individual success, right? And therefore, I really feel like we're upholding and uplifting all of each other in the different ways as we had through the advisory council, to your visiting and having tea, and then how we're meeting and interacting therefore as a result, you know, and I'm imagining that will continue to grow through this work as we continue to share what we know and present what's meaningful to us and why. So
yeah, and just a piece of that, right, Cindy, is that so one of the things that I realized, and you know, as a leader now or as an administrator, right, it really is important to say, how is it that we walk? How is it that we walk along the way? How is it that we enact these ideas that we have? And so the notion of community, the notion of how we bring together, and the notion of a collective, this is a critically important idea, because in the teachings that I've had in my life is that we are individuals, but we are also part of and collectives. Like we belong, we are in community, and at the same time, there's this, we're not just one without the other. And so how is it that we acknowledge and recognize this, right? And say that we're all on individual journeys as well, making sense of who we are. And I remember when I was working on my dissertation, I came to this awareness, and then Dr. King sort of helped me understand it better. I came to this awareness that we spend our whole life figuring out who we are. And he said to me, yeah, and it's figuring out who you're meant to be. And so how do we welcome people in all of their diversities, right? And I've always had this image now around this notion of circularity, right? Because we're often mentioned that we see this relational, and we can see each day as a new place to start. Each day, each person is in some stage of their life of coming to know who they are. But I've always had this vision, an image in my mind, is how is it that I recognize everybody in those places? So everybody is working in their own cycle, and then together we bring together a bigger collective cycle. And the differences are really important. So there's all kinds of possibilities for presenting our presence, and that's really exciting. And when we think about collectivity and complexity, these are possibilities that will emerge in the interactions. And this is really exciting. So when I think about some of the history of colonization around universities, I think of the Indian Act. I think of the ways in which our First Nation relatives, because you and I are both Métis, our relatives may not have been impacted. Our Métis relatives may not have been impacted in the same way, but our First Nation relatives certainly were. I mean, at one point in time, you had to give up your status in your community in order to attend university. And that was the Indian Act. So to be visible and to be present at a university now in all of our relatives as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, non-status, it is significant that we are presenting our presence because we are here. And we had ancestors who had to leave their status behind, leave their identity behind. But like you said earlier, what we want to celebrate is the ways in which our identities are with us. We can't leave them at the door. Knowledge isn't so objective that you can just drop it as you walk into the formal institution. So I really see it as a place of saying, we're here, we have been here, but now we're here in all of who we are and our complete selves. So that's part of what I think is important about presenting our presence.
And that's so true, Florence, because, in the spirit of that, the space is also there to explore that. And as you said, like the becoming of that and the safety within that, which is, I think, really key. And, for me personally, in the last year, with the space of becoming visible to one another, not that we ever weren't visible, but the space was created to be visible to one another. And it gave me a new, it kind of repaired an insecurity in some sense that I didn't have a place here or belong here or wasn't smart enough, and oh my God, how am I going to survive the academy? So something started to heal, or to, the only word that kind of feels like repair, like because there was a regeneration of being well and feeling well in those spaces. And I thought about how presenting our presence was almost shifting the feelings of isolation in the work. Like we were presenting our presence with one another without saying it that way. We were just being who we are. And now it's expanding. So it was unsettling tokenism. It was unsettling being isolated, alone in certain faculties, carrying the burdens of reconciliation, of systemic racism, of the microaggressions. We didn't have to be holding those things alone anymore. We could actually have a space where we could speak to it. We could speak to our responsibilities and what gives us joy in our work. For me, it's like the visiting and those teachings, and there was room for those teachings because we share our teachings in that spaces. So that was also valued and validated. And historically it hasn't, and even contemporarily, there's still that challenge about the ways in which how we do or think and be still don't have room. But the more that we are present and hold that and hold certain accountability to the systems, we can even imagine that there will be reduced stereotypes, that there would be spaces for future generations, because in so many ways it's for us and it's for those who we serve, which are our students. And there's also that working together. It's like, I know now she's in that faculty, right? So there's something about that connectivity that creates an inner strength, but also an outer strength.
Cindy, the image that I have as you expressed that, it's like the we can walk a little taller, we can walk a little stronger, we can walk a little with our stride a little more firm, because we realize that we are in relationship with others. And that burden that you mentioned, it isn't just only metaphorically on our own shoulders, right? It's less of a burden to the self because we are supported by the collective. So we may not have anybody walking next to us, but we can feel that way because we have been given this way to walk. And it's really, you took us back, you introduced, you said this idea emerged in these virtual teas. And, the virtual teas came about because of the pandemic. And the pandemic hit, and, the Office of Indigenous Initiatives used to try and hold teas in person. And there would be people who would come regularly, which was a gift. And then the pandemic hit. And, we thought we'd try it and see how it would be. And in the first 4 months, we just planned a tea for every week. And we tried different times, given people's schedules, because if you have it always just at one time, people might not be available. If you have it Tuesday morning all the time, then it just cuts out people. So we randomly set it up. So the teas occurred, and then just to build community, because to feel connected during the pandemic and to sit together. And then, when the September came along, we thought, oh, now there's so much more going on. People are teaching and everybody's just learning about how to be now completely online. So we went to every 2 weeks. And now we're back to the weekly teas, because it is generally there's less teaching that goes on from May to August. So this idea has blossomed into this notion of presenting our presence. So thank you for the reminder, and thank you for the reminder of what it means to also be there and be able to walk in a different way because of the support.